Hey everybody, welcome to another special Matt Men interview. I'm Andrew Zarin. I'm joined by Rich Stambolian. Hey, Rich.
Hey, Andrew. How are you?
I'm good. This is our 18th show of the week. No, it's actually our second, right?
Two and a half.
2.5.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a very busy week. Rich is gonna be running around at a bunch of shows. I'm gonna be at a bunch of shows covering it, and we're gonna be releasing these interviews throughout the week. And I got a great message from from somebody on Twitter, and he said, "Hey, do you want to interview this person?" And I said, "Absolutely, 130%. I think it'll be a lot of fun." I want to introduce Chris Masters to the show. Hey, Chris.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You said you're in sunny and warm Toronto, right? Is that how you put it?
Yeah, like I was telling you guys off there. Actually, right now I'm scrubbing ice off of my windshield. Something I'm not particularly used to because I can't drive the car because it's just covered in snow and ice is frozen through it. And yeah, I'm just loving life up here.
Yeah, by the way, we're not doing the interview. The interview's not being done in February or January.
It's April.
It's April. I want to.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah. Before we get into talking about everything that Chris has been up to, I want to let everybody know Chris is going to be at an awesome show, UPWA in Wayne, New Jersey, on Wednesday, April 3rd. You could go and see Chris. Billy Gunn's going to be there, Ricky Reyes, Sonny Kiss, and a whole slew of people. Buff Bagwell, all going to be there. Bell time, 7 p.m. Doors open at 6. Front row. Tickets, $30. General admission, 20. Kids, 10. This is actually looking like it's a great event. Chris, what do you know what you're going to be doing over there exactly?
I know I got a singles match against an up-and-comer in the area. I don't actually know his name off the top of my head, but I know this is going to be a big show, and I'm kind of looking at this like it's the unofficial Wrestlemania kickoff since we got the whole week in New York and New Jersey. It's probably one of the first shows, being that it's Wednesday, so it's a good chance for everybody to kind of get a head start on things, come check out a good show. I mean, like you said, you got Billy Gunn, who's going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame along with the Generation X, so it's a good time to pay your respects to him. I'll be in action. You got Buff the Stuff. You know, what more do you need than Buff the Stuff anyway? You know
Yeah,
I mean?
what more do you need than Buff the Stuff? You know, it's amazing. You said you have you're wrestling an up and comer, and you have been around since the early 2000s at this point, and it's crazy because to a lot of people, because of your physique and how you take care of yourself, you're still out there doing this. It's how has it been like for you with the longevity of professional wrestling and what it does on your body? Obviously, you're in unbelievable condition, unbelievable shape, and you constantly take care of yourself. But what is it like? What's the ups and downs for you as far as continuing to do this?
Well, it's just been, I still stay in good shape. I still train regularly and everything, but it's been much more difficult to kind of stay. Like when I first broke into the WWE, I looked like the Hulk. I mean, I was literally just like Thanos or something. It was ridiculous. But it's been, you get wear and tear, and it gets it's not hard to really stay in shape, but it's hard to kind of maintain that peak size, because you start getting these kind of lingering things, or injuries start kind of slowly kind of piling up, and, you have to kind of work around those. So it becomes much more difficult. You have to change a lot of things in your lifestyle. And what I found more is later, like at this point in my career, I have to try to keep myself in check from getting too big, actually, a lot of the time, just because it becomes much harder on my body and I become much more injury prone. I mean, whether, I had an ACL just a couple of years ago that went out in my knee and had that surgery on that, and, just all kinds of various things throughout the years. And, it's not one particular injury, it's just the combination of all of them that just starts really kind of getting to you, and you have to change a lot of stuff, like the way you eat, the way you train, just all of it, and just kind of adapt in order to stay healthy and keep doing it.
Nice. Did you grow up a fan?
Oh, yeah, I grew up. I mean, I don't know how anybody would do this line of work if you didn't kind of, I'm not saying you have to grow up loving it, but you have to kind of really love this to kind of stick it out to do it, because it's not as glamorous as it looks on TV. There's a lot of, a lot of crap you got to go through travel and just, everything outside of what you see on television. But yeah, man, I grew up loving it since I was like 8 years old. I think my first year watching wrestling was probably 1989. And, Ultimate Warrior was my guy when I first started watching. And then Shawn Michaels, when he went singles, he became like, I don't know, it was the first heel I ever liked. I was like, this guy, coming out to this Sexy Boy song with Sherry, I just freaking loved it.
Yeah.
And he was a great performer.
I always have to explain to people how bizarre it is as an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old. You're hopping up and down on the couch screaming, "I'm a sexy boy," when your parents are sitting in the next room.
Oh yeah, it is. It is very odd. And then I eventually discovered WCW. That took a little while though, because I discovered that in like 1991, just flipping through the channels, and I saw Sting and I saw Rick Rude, who I had been wondering where the hell he went. And, I just kind of continued watching it throughout most of my life. I took a 3-year hiatus in like 1993, I think. I don't know what I was doing, but I got caught up. I don't know, just, one of those things. And then I got pulled right back in at the end of 95. And then I watched the Iron Man match with Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. And I mean, that was it. I was just hooked for life after that. Like that was the match and the show for me. And there was no looking back.
So I always, because we're around the same age, so we have the same upbringing when it comes to professional wrestling. At what point did you say, you went from watching this to, I want to do this. This is something I want to do. And realistically, I want to do this. Not hanging out with a couple of buddies and saying I want to be a wrestler. But you sat down and you said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. When was that moment, and what was the process like to get into the business?
Well, I think it was my sophomore year in high school. It went from being my biggest hobby to, I don't know. I just had this epiphany one day. I was just like, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life career-wise. And I just realized all I really cared about was wrestling. I was always reading wrestling magazines or throwing my friends into the lockers head first, all that kind of crazy stuff. So it just kind of made sense. And then as time went on, I realized that I had a couple things that I was gifted with, a few things just through genetics and whatnot. Like I had height, which was helpful, obviously. I mean, that's not the end all be all, but being a tall guy helped. And, I just figured all I love is wrestling, so I should really try to pursue this. So I started taking the necessary steps of, what I kind of thought I had to do, whether, obviously like working out was one of the first things, and, learning how to eat. And of course, finding a wrestling school, which wasn't too difficult. There was a school pretty local to me in Los Angeles that, quite a few guys ended up going to, myself, John Cena, Miz, a lot of guys kind of came out of there. So that was kind of my process. But school really suffered once I decided I wanted to go into pro wrestling, because my life pretty much revolved around that, and that was it.
So that was, because like Andrew said, we're all kind of like around the same age. So I'm assuming that was like late 90s?
Yeah. I was probably I probably made the decision around 1999, I think, or something like that, maybe. And then I started training at about 16 years old. Oh, wow. And I got hurt. John Cena and me actually started training at the same school on the same day in California, UPW. The only difference is obviously I ended up getting hurt. I fractured my ankle, and then I, kind of saw what WWE was looking at. I wasn't really big enough, and I wasn't mature enough or anything. I was 16 years old. So a lot of that was just actually from watching Cena. Like Cena at that point was older than me, and he was already like a big jacked up dude. So once I had surgery on my ankle, I just decided to take a couple-year hiatus and kind of work on the other aspects of my game, being, the gym and maturing. And, I had a job at that point. So, making a little bit of money to support all that. And then I always had it in my head that I would come back around like 18 or 19, which was just a couple of years later, and really go in head first and, put everything back into it.
I always like to discuss, the training regimen to kind of get big like that and to kind of work out. My father was a bodybuilder, and so was my grandfather was a competitive bodybuilder in the 50s. So, a lot of it is genetics, right? You need to have that genetic makeup to be able to, develop that muscle. did you go into, I guess, wrestling early on with some sort of a physique? Were you genetically gifted to begin with?
Well, yeah, I had good genetics, but I didn't necessarily know it. I mean, like I said, I had height, which was an advantage. Sorry, someone was just calling in on the line. We'll just let me just send that. Whatever, just let them go to voicemail. I had height, which was obviously an advantage, but I mean, I didn't know I really necessarily had good genetics. Like, I hadn't met my dad actually until much way later, until I was actually in WWE. But
oh wow,
he was a pretty big guy. But throughout growing up, I was like skinny, like really, really skinny, like as skinny as you could be. So I was just a tall, skinny kid. And once I started working out, though, within like a couple of years, I started realizing I had a good, like, kind of what we're referencing to, like, good genetics, because I started filling out, and then I realized that I had, you know, kind of like a broad shoulders and a good frame to build on. And, you know, that really kind of showed itself with time after I got like a good couple of years of training and I actually learned how to train. And then I started realizing, oh, okay, you know, I do have, you know, I am equipped with a lot of good things in order to go into pro wrestling, as far as genetics, height, size, all that stuff.
Yeah, I want to. So you started training, obviously, and I don't want to. I want to kind of talk about, you know, the development of wrestling and how it's shifted for you. What do you think of the current makeup of pro wrestling and where we're at right now? Because we see, you know, AEW's coming into the mix, and independent wrestling has boomed. Would you consider this kind of a renaissance era for wrestling?
I don't. Yeah, I mean it is, but it feels like a renaissance for like the world in general. I feel like the world is ever changing, and pro wrestling is no different. I think. I mean, you just look at the main event of Wrestlemania. I mean, to have women headlining it, you know, Becky Lynch, Ronda, and Charlotte is just. It shows you how much has changed. And then even when you look at the roster, I mean, there's a lot of guys getting opportunities that were not getting opportunities, quite frankly, when I first started training or when I broke in. So it's definitely just, I mean, it's ever changing, but the world seems to be ever changing. So I just feel like, you know, that's just where we're at in life. You know, like you guys were talking about before we got on the podcast about technology. I mean, technology it's a renaissance in that aspect too. I mean, just social media, everything, you know, it's just a really interesting time to be alive in this world.
What do you think of the style changes currently that we're seeing? You know, a lot of it is a lot faster, and even, you know, not necessarily big 6'5" guys, but your heavyweights are doing all the stuff that cruiserweights did initially. How have you adapted to that? Obviously, you're not doing, you know, all these dives and flips off the top, but I mean, there has to be some sort of change, right, with style as you continue and you progress in wrestling.
I wouldn't say much has changed on my point. I mean, I still think I was taught in like OVW, and that was more of a Southern style, which kind of sticks to certain principles, a little more of storytelling and not wasting things. You know, like there's a lot of things. There's a lot of good things about wrestling, but there's also a lot of bad things. I mean, you see a lot of guys just doing stuff and not selling it. Super kicks used every other move just as a transition, or combos, just, you know, don't bump for the sake of just not bumping so I can do another move on you. I'm not particularly a big fan of seeing women against men unless it's done correctly and it's done selectively. You know, like, I don't want you necessarily putting me out there with a woman, and, you know, if I'm going to clothesline her, that should be all she wrote. You know, from a psychology standpoint, it just doesn't physically make sense. And that's not anything to dog on women at all, obviously, but you know, it's just, I don't know. I know I'm not just speaking on myself. I know even a lot of my peers feel the same way, because there's a lot of guys that aren't necessarily happy with certain things about the way the business has gone nowadays. But, you know, that's not the dog on it. That's just how it is. You know, like, it's like you said, most people do have to adapt. But, you know, luckily for me, I'm put in situations where, you know, I can kind of steer the car, so to speak. You know, like, I can pick and choose, you know, what I'm going to do and who I'm going to work with and whatnot.
That so in essence, you're more of like a traditionalist, and you know.
Oh yeah, very very much so. Like, I don't like wasting anything just to go into another, you know, just to go into another move sequence or anything like that, or just trying to quote unquote get your shit in type deal. You know, it has to make sense within the confines of the match. And, you know, to me, the most important thing is still the story, making the most out of everything you do, and not just trying to insert shit in there just for the sake of doing it. You know, it has to all go back to, like, does this fit in for what we're trying to accomplish in the context of the story of the match, which, you know, I mean, that style is still going strong. I mean, I know wrestling as a whole has changed quite a bit, but I mean, you know, there's certain places where that's just never going to die. And, you know, there's a lot of guys who still kind of preach from that Bible, just like myself.
Right. And honestly, it ties into my second question, supplementary question, which is you really can't get more traditional than using a full Nelson as your sleeper, right? As your finisher, right? How
yeah, no, exactly.
How was that pitched to you? Did you pitch that? Because that was, I want to say you debuted in 2005, right?
Yeah.
So how did that work?
It.
Okay.
Honestly, I didn't pitch it. Honestly, I didn't pitch it because as a fan, I would have thought this kind of the same way you guys do, like that. I would have thought like that's never going to get over, or like, you know, it's a little too basic. Like, you know, like the rest, internet marks aren't going to necessarily get with that. But I mean, it's not necessarily the right way to look at it, because a lot of things is about like, it's about pushing a certain move. Like they push the master lock in a way. I mean, first of all, it's a legit hold. I mean, if you're just comparing it to like shoot fighting or MMA or something like that, I mean, the full Nelson is definitely legit. Like, I mean, I used to use it before I even got into wrestling as a bouncer,
right,
in order to restrain guys, so I didn't have to, like, you know, punch them in the face or something. It was a lot easier just to, you know, lock them up in a full Nelson and like drag them out of a club than, you know, beat the shit out of them. So I hope I can curse on here.
No,
go
right
ahead.
ahead.
You're good.
Yeah. So I mean, that was always a lot easier. So I mean, you know, there's a lot of legitimacy behind the move, but the question is were wrestling fans going to get behind it? And the answer was, well, you know, like they did the Master Lock Challenge and they pushed it right. And if you see it long enough working, and, you know, not to mention the presentation of me being this, you know, 6'4", 280-pound guy, I mean, that helps it out too. You know, they gave it some legs and it was able to be legitimate within WWE. But I mean, like, to answer your question, I didn't push for that at all. We were just trying to find a move for me in general, because they had this whole idea of bringing me in based upon a move that I would, you know, kind of dominate with initially. Mm-hmm. And I want to say that Arn Anderson might have come up with the idea for it, and it does seem like an Arn Anderson type of idea. So, and I was even, when we started doing it, I mean, I questioned it myself. I'm like, is this really going to work? But like, you know, Hunter really pushed it, and they really just, you know, kept putting it out there. And, you know, with time, I mean, it took time, obviously, but with time, I mean, it built up to the point where they were actually able to use the Master Lock Challenge as a main event on Raw against Shawn Michaels at one time, which turned out really well.
I loved the build of that, by the way, how they did the Master Lock Challenge every single week. I really, really enjoyed how it was presented, and it really shows you. You know, you could have a full Nelson as your finisher and make it look legit. I mean, obviously it's a legitimate move, but really make it into a legitimate finisher, and people could kind of get behind it. Or you could do a flip off a rafter and fall on a guy, and he could kick at it too. You know, like, it's amazing. It's interesting how wrestling, the perspective is in pro wrestling. You know, you brought up the fans, and I kind of wanted to ask you, as someone that's a little bit of a traditionalist, you brought up that you were trained with the Southern style, and you have a different mentality about this. What do you think about the transparency that we currently have with the internet, and how essentially there's really no surprises? And the way that rumors spread, and just the way that the internet is with pro wrestling at this point?
You know what? I have no problem with it, actually, because, I mean, even before I broke into the business around 97, and you guys would probably attest to this too, around 97, 98, you started having a lot of this stuff going on, a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. I remember there was a lot of wrestling hotlines that you could actually call that weren't just the 900 numbers or anything like that, but actually, like, you know, guys that would set up these lines on these networks that you could call in and you could get wrestling news. I remember searching like wrestleboard.com and all that stuff. So, I mean, I kind of, you know, I feel like I'm from both generations, you know what I mean? Like, I'm of the current generation, like a millennial, but before that too. And we just, you know, we kind of used to having the internet around as a place that you could kind of indulge on more wrestling and find out what's going on behind the scenes and what's going on with these two guys, or what's this guy's job status, or just whatever. There's always news going on, So I mean, it's gotten a lot. There's so much more of it now. I mean, it's actually crazy. I mean, especially because back then there wasn't social media. There was just like the websites you could go to, like I said, like wrestleboard.com, SoCal Uncensored, all that kind of stuff. But now you've got social media with it. I mean, the only difference now is it seems like it's just, you could go visit a website once a day back in the day, but now it's like there's just a constant flow of information, like 4 times a day or quarter, every few hours. So I mean, honestly, it's just hard to keep up with anymore. And I don't think that even just applies to wrestling. That just applies to the NBA. The NBA is pretty similar too in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing, and I think the younger generation that really wants to get into wrestling has so much available content. I mean, there was no WWE Network when we were growing up, or even teenagers, right? There was no YouTube for us to look at matches.
Could you imagine?
You know what, Chris? I'm going to tell you something.
Yeah,
I think it would have been a bad
like
thing.
That.
I think it would have been a bad thing, and I think we would have been.
That's all I would have ever done.
Yeah, that's it. But the other side of this, what do you think of the criticism that we see on social media? The lack of patience with storylines, or the criticism of talent and matches. That's the only aspect that bothers me a little bit.
Well, yeah, and I was at the receiving end of a lot of that around the time we were just talking about, with the Master Lock Challenge. I'm sure a lot of people were probably bearing it on the internet. Like, I try not to pay attention to it much personally, just because, I mean, what's the use in that stuff? You know what I mean? Like, everybody's going to be critical of everything. And I'm far too sensitive to read that stuff all the time, because it will probably start getting to me. And that's kind of useless for me. It's not really going to work, because there's always a critic. Even if it's going well, things are going well, there's a critic. So, yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, I don't know how it is for the guys nowadays, because obviously I haven't been up there since about 2011. But I know personally, if it was me, I would still probably not pay attention to the internet that much, just because it would probably drive me insane. And I mean, I don't know. What do you guys have any opinion on that?
I have a real thick skin, because I've been kind of my entire adult life, since my 20s, I've been online as a public person. But at times, it could get to you. But
you're saying you don't think there's patience for particular wrestlers, and you think that actually affects the product, or
I think there's a lack of patience from letting things play out a little bit, and you'll see a story I'll give an example. The whole the main event of WrestleMania, right? The Becky Lynch and Charlotte and Ronda Rousey thing. The fact that people don't have the patience to let the storyline and the angle play out to the end result, it gets frustrating to kind of look at, because I produce a wrestling show in Jersey, actually, and I see the same kind of criticism from just people from within the company, where they don't really, want to wait for things to play out, and I can see how that's a problem.
To touch back on that, I mean, like we were just talking about before, they did the same thing with the Master Lock Challenge, and credit to Triple H. Triple H told them to keep going with it, because it will get over. It just needs the amount of time. So, I mean, I think that's kind of what we're both saying is, you can't necessarily listen to the short-term criticism of something. You got to sometimes have faith in it and let it play out. And, I mean, in particular with the girls, I mean, I think that from the minute kind of Becky Lynch started getting over, and then I heard that they might use the women in the main event, it just felt right for whatever reason. It just felt like, this is the time, and you have the right person now in the driver's seat, being Becky. Ronda and Charlotte are great too, but I mean, Becky's just kind of brought this to a whole nother level, where I think you can legitimately make this a main event. And it seems like all three of the girls have done a great job in building it. Just, to really giving it, getting it to a point where the company could give them the nod to be the main event of the pay-per-view, just through what they've done throughout the past few weeks in terms of building it, in terms of social media, and all that stuff.
Chris, I gotta ask you, and I wanna say yes already, not to speak for you, but it sounds like are you still a fan? Are you still a fan of just wrestling in general?
You know what? Honestly, I wish I was to the same point. Like, I don't know. It's never been the same for me, honestly, since, I mean, like we talked about before, man, I was the biggest fan throughout my whole childhood and growing up. But, you know, I mean, I pay attention to it now, but man, I'm not like, honestly, I haven't watched Raw in years. The only way I kind of know what's going on is through what I see on Instagram. And, you know, I pay attention to what's going on with some of my friends up there and whatnot, but I don't know, the fan's not there anymore. I think like the NBA is kind of taking the place for what wrestling was for me back when I was growing up.
Okay, that's fair enough. So it's basically you saw how the hot dogs were made, and now you don't want to eat them anymore.
Well, yeah, and I've also, you know, I'm jaded because I've lived the business, and I still continue to live the business because I wrestle every weekend. So I mean, for me, a lot of times it's more like I want some separation from it because I don't want my whole life 24/7 to be wrestling. Because every weekend when I go to a show, I mean, you got to imagine, you know, all these promotions I go to, I mean, they still live, breathe, eat, and sleep it, and that's all they want to talk to me about is wrestling and my time in WWE and all that. And, you know, I'm fine. I'll indulge them on that. But, you know, I try to, you know, just consciously make an effort to create some balance in my life and get away from it and not really partake in watching it as much as a fan, you know?
So I want to remind everybody, you are wrestling this week in Wayne, New Jersey for UPWA, Live Professional Wrestling. You can go check it out in Wayne, New Jersey at the Wayne Powell Building, 1 Powell Drive. Doors open at 6, bell time 7 o'clock. Tickets are still available. You go to theupwa.com. That's theupwa.com. You could go and purchase your tickets. Obviously, you're on the card. Ricky Reyes, Billy Gunn, and a whole lot more. Chris, before we wrap it up, obviously, I could talk to you for another hour here. I really enjoyed this, and I'd love to do it again. Would you go back?
We'll have to have me back on, man.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And we can, you know, maybe we could do like a Skype video thing and have you on because I'd love to do something again. Just a quick question. Would you go back up to WWE? Is that something that you would consider at this point?
Oh, yeah. You can never say never. I mean, anybody who says never, I mean, I don't understand that. I mean, I'm still wrestling for these independent promotions and all over the world. So, I mean, for me to say that I wouldn't go back to the big leagues would be, wouldn't be honest. But, I mean, I'll just put it this way. It's not like the first time I got released from WWE, it was definitely on my radar and it was something I wanted to do. But since my last departure from WWE, it's just never felt like, you know, it's not my mission in life. It hasn't been something on my radar. If it's something they pursued me about, I would obviously entertain the idea and you know, try to work it out to the best I can. But it's not something I'm pushing for necessarily.
And what do you? I'll get killed, but if I don't ask you this, because people wanted, when I said that you were coming on, people wanted me to get your opinion on this. What do you think of AEW at this point?
I just think it's great. The more wrestling, the better. I think, what was their first show, All In? I mean, for me, being a guy still in the business, wrestling, when you have something that's successful like All In, and it's independent from WWE, I mean, it's just a testament to how well the wrestling business is doing in general. And I end up, you know, we all feel it. That means that we're all going to be working more. We're all going to be doing well. And also, I mean, we all grew up in a time when there was, you guys included, where, I mean, I'm sure you guys remember how great the Monday Night Wars were. I mean, that was probably the best time in wrestling. So it was really much better. It was really so much better when there was somebody else that was relevant that was competing against WWE. I mean, and we haven't had anything like that since, what was it, 1998 or 99, when that all, the whole Monday Night War wrapped up. So, I mean, I think for the whole business, it's going to be good. And, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the company. I mean, I hope for the best for them, and I hope that they're able to do it well. And it's just so hard to compete with WWE. You know, it's a thing. I mean, Vince really has mastered the art of this. I mean, even back when they had the Monday Night Wars, the production of WWE was always so much better. I mean, they just have a way of doing it better than anybody else. So you can just, you know, hope that All Elite can do everything they can to bring in, fresh talent and, really create something that can compete against them. I mean, I don't even know if that's necessarily what they're trying to do, but, just to have something else, another promotion that is really relevant will be awesome.
I agree with you 100%. More competition, the better. Chris, I want to thank you for coming on. Have a great WrestleMania week. Obviously, you're going to be doing UPWA. You're going to be at WrestleCon. And who knows where else you'll pop up. But if I'm at WrestleCon, I'll definitely stop by and say hello.
Oh, yeah. And to anybody listening, come stop by WrestleCon. I'll be at the Hybrid SOW booth over there. That's a wrestling promotion/school from Texas. And MVP will also be with me. So you got a couple washed-up wrestlers over there, or washed-up WWE guys, as they say.
Guys, again, UPWA, Wednesday, April 3rd in Wayne, New Jersey. We'll have a link in our show notes. You can go see Chris along with Billy Gunn and Ricky Reyes and Sonny Kiss, Buff Bagwell, the Patriot even. So all these guys are going to be there. It's going to be a great show. Chris, I want to thank you for coming on, and let's do it again soon.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome.